I think we might be live on YouTube. It certainly seems promising. So let's go ahead and start sharing this shit. Let's post that here. And post that here. That shit is an old fucking thumbnail. That is an old ass thumbnail. Can I change the thumbnail of this shit? I think I can. Y'all, I'm so inexperienced at OBS Studio. I've used this thing, I don't know, half a dozen times? No, it's more than that. It has to have been like 10 times, maybe a dozen times in my life. And I still never learn. But welcome to any of you joining. I'm just going to try to update this thumbnail right quick. Okay. So now they should get something a little bit more realistic. But welcome aboard. I am probably going to keep this live on YouTube after it's done, which is not something that I've done for past streams historically. But you know how it is. Grant, welcome. How is it going, my friend? But yeah, hopefully this is just a little chance for me to kind of talk a teeny bit about some of the channel updates and podcast updates, I suppose, that have been coming out. So we'll see if we get any more people coming in before I kind of go into my spiel here. Also, let me know, anyone who's jumping on, how the sound quality is. I've had some issues getting this set up to work in past streams. I think I've gotten it to the point where it's decent now. And if you have any issues, notice any issues, If it's too loud, it's too quiet, anything like that, just shout it out. Oh, we love chilling, Grant. Yeah, let me know what game you're playing right now. What's up, Shane? I'll show this to the audience here. We're in LaCroix time right now. This is the beach plum flavor. I don't know if we've got any sparkling water enthusiasts here, but if you are one, if you're a fan of sparkling water and you're into like LaCroix and bubbly and that sort of thing, I am curious what your favorite flavors are. What's up, Miro? All right. It's called Out of the Park. It's a baseball management sim, basically playing the game of managing a roster, drafting players, ticket prices, trades, etc. You know, there was an NFL game like that I played back in the day, like in 2010, something like that. I think it was called NFL Head Coach or something like that. It was on the PS3. And I'm not a gamer, but I did get into like the Madden games for a very long time. And I remember that game was a lot of fun because it's about roster management and shit like that. Yeah, you know what I'm talking about. It's about like roster management, but the problem that I had was I could only get so far within a season with the copy I had because I got it used. That eventually, like the game would always like freeze. I think it had like one scratch on it, like one very obvious scratch to where you could still run the game, but it would always like freeze after you'd finished like a full season or something like that. So I never got to like actually play a multi-season campaign, and I was always bummed about that. I got into Madden with Madden 07. I had Tavi. Good to see you, buddy. I appreciate it. I'm glad you're able to stop by, and I hope you have a good rest. Yeah, Madden 07. That was the first one I played on the GameCube, actually, because I didn't have a PlayStation at the time. So I got some of the older Maddens because I started like collecting them for whatever reason. So I own Madden 04. It's sitting with my other games right now, but I don't know that I've ever actually played it. I was really into Madden 07 and Madden 2010, and then I got Madden 11. I think Madden 11 and Madden 10 were like the two that I got on release day or like contemporary with when it came out. And ever since then, I don't think I played a Madden game actually later than that. I might have played like Madden 25, like the 25th anniversary thing they did around like freshman year of college or something, but that's about it. Anyways, that was a tangent. Okay. So yeah, as I was saying, really, you know, I'm kind of here just to chill, just to chat with people about whatever they want. But I did want to use this to be, I wanted to use this as a forum to talk a little bit about kind of what the channel is going to kind of evolve into and what the Music Deep Dive project is going to turn into as well. So let's jump into that. First of all, just an incredible shout out. Just thank you to everybody who has been a part of this journey. I know some folks have been there since almost the beginning of this channel. We launched it in July of 2022, I want to say. And at the time, I think I don't know what I was initially intending it for. I was doing like reaction video type of things where I was like listening to classical music and stuff like that and giving my impressions on it. Those were all like live stream type of things, and they're all unlisted now, at least as far as I know they are. And then late 2022, we started doing like book reviews because I was like, well, I'm reading a lot of books for this project. I should do something meaningful with my time. And so I decided to make reviews. And I mean, it was very slow going. There's not a huge market for book reviews unless you're part of the like booktube crowd, if you will. And I find that booktube, generally speaking, has a very specific niche. Not even a niche, not even like a genre niche, just more so they are invested in contemporary releases, which is totally understandable. And a lot of times it's focused around, you know, the genres of romance or fantasy or science fiction. Very little in the way of like nonfiction focus. And, you know, I think there's some attention paid to like the classics, but not necessarily, you know, you're not necessarily doing huge numbers by reviewing Jane Austen novels. So, you know, it was very slow going for a long time. Eventually I started doing some music reviews and music related content. The big, I think, boost was the video that I did about the Sideways Adam Neely controversy back in late 2023. That one blew up in a way that none of the other videos have, and really is responsible for a decent bit of the subscriber increase that I've had. But the growth has continued, and it's been really fun. And now, you know, we're at 800 subscribers. We're getting ever closer to 1,000, which is really exciting. So just thank you to everybody who's been a part of that. And here's the thing, Grant, like zero shame. There's zero shame in reading exclusively fiction or exclusively fantasy. Nothing wrong with that at all. I think and if anything, I think that's indicative of a larger scale trend. And like, that's what people are interested in. That's what people are invested in. And, you know, nothing wrong with not being interested in nonfiction. It just means that for those of us who are, it's kind of harder to break into that market, if you will, because, you know, it's harder to break through because less people are going to be invested in it. So nothing to feel guilty about. Also, hey, Steph, thank you. Really appreciate it. So yeah, 800 subscribers. You know, in an ideal world, we'd love to get to 1,000 before the end of the year. I think that's doable for sure. And that kind of ties into the next part of what I'm hoping to kind of talk about here. So I made a post on YouTube, on like the YouTube posts feed, which who the hell knows if that gets shown to anybody at this point, honestly. I hear people say that like people don't see those posts, so I have no idea if people actually saw it, but I did also share it on social media that we are at the point right now where we are actively starting to work on the culmination really of what this music deep dive project is about. And that is the podcast that I've been making reference to for quite a bit now. I think I started talking about it probably late 2023, early 2024, something like that. And now we're at the point where it's coming very close to a reality. I'm going to turn this off. I'll probably turn this on and off throughout the whole stream here. But I just want to kind of focus on this specific topic here and just concentrate for a moment. So I touched on in past videos the kind of what this deep dive project is about. I don't necessarily need to go over it now, but if people have questions about it or are curious about it, then I'm all ears, happy to answer anything. But essentially what I want to do now and what this kind of next phase of the channel is going to look like, in this project in general, is we're going to be kind of shifting our focuses a little bit. I think I may have alluded to this as well in the update that I did back in January, I think it was, but I'm just going to kind of reiterate it. So the past, 4.5 years really is how long I've been working on this. The past 4.5 years have been focused on doing the necessary reading and the necessary kind of background context and contextual digging and researching that's needed to tell the story of the history of recorded music. That's been a huge focus, and that's a there's many different factors, because you not only have to read about music history, but you also have to read about the context surrounding things. You need to read about major cultural figures. You need to read about the history of art and various other different kind of art forms. And you also need to, read, as part of that, you need to understand the history of classic literature, because I think that's a huge piece. So all of the books that we've been reading and we've been talking about and we've been reviewing on the channel, like, they all serve some sort of a purpose towards building up to this narrative. They haven't been a complete waste of time. They're not complete side tracks, or at least most of them are not complete sidebars. Now we're at the point where my reading is kind of, if you've been following the chronology, taken me to the late 1860s. And now we're at the point where shit is starting to get real. We're right up at the point where sound recording is being invented and is being talked about. And because of that, I'm still going to be doing this contextual reading. There's still stuff I need to understand and get more information about before telling this story, but I also want to make sure that I'm tying this into actually getting some sort of product out there. So what I'm doing is I'm going to be most likely slowing down the pace of book reviews that are coming out on the channel. So I see I see the appreciation coming through in the comments, which is really cool. Book reviews are still going to be coming out for sure. You're still going to get them, but they're probably not going to be at quite the quick clip that they were. And you might see a little bit more of a focus on books that are very directly relevant to what we're doing here. So more books about specific eras of music, more books about specific musicians, things like that. I'm going to still talk about them and still do videos on them as I'm reviewing them for the channel. Because if there's one thing that I really want to direct people to do as part of this project, it's to get people to buy these books. It's to get people to actually do even more research on some of these major figures, major cultural, artistic figures, or whatever. I want people to get to the point where they feel that sense of curiosity, that they will seek more information. So part of that means I do need to talk about what I'm reading and what I'm researching. So you're still going to get book reviews, and there's still going to be reviews of classics and things like that. I think if you see anything that's probably going to take a hit, there's probably going to be less nonfiction reviews on non-music related books. So I don't think a lot of people are going to be crying about that. I don't think people are necessarily out here looking for more reviews of Alexander Pushkin biographies per se. And the view counts on those videos would lead me to believe that's the case. But you're still going to get less of those, and you're still going to get not an increase, but still a consistent stream of classics and that sort of thing. In addition to that as well, we're going to be continuing to do music-related content, and really we're going to heavily pivot into that, I think. So kind of my goal is to start to really try to advertise this thing a little bit more, to really start consciously talking about this deep dive project. And a big piece of that is going to be talking about music a little bit more actively on this platform. And that means leaning into things like the deep dives, things like the year of album ranking videos and starting to do those. They're not necessarily going to be my prime focus because the prime focus is still on creating a podcast, creating on a narrative, creating a history. But I still want to make sure that people ultimately are getting eyes on this project in some way. And I think one of the easiest ways to do that is to make more of those types of videos because people seem to enjoy those. They're certainly the videos that do the best on the channel overall from a metric standpoint. So it's kind of a no-brainer. And in a way, it also helps me because that way, by doing these kind of like deep dives, if you will, I am sort of getting ahead of myself and kind of exploring the material that eventually, far down the road, I'll be writing about and doing hopefully podcast episodes about. 1953 and 1954, which are like the years that I've been in the middle of doing a lot of listening for the last few weeks, last couple months or so, those are not going to come up in the podcast for a very long time. I absolutely know there's going to be a ton of material before the year 1950 that is going to take up a lot of time. There's a lot of major figures that we need to talk about in a podcast setting and in a historical setting. So that's going to be a far, far ways out. But I need to also understand the roadmap of kind of where I need to get to when constructing this narrative. Because if there's one thing that I've realized so far, there's no shortage of information. I would have enough information about the history of music to continue making podcasts for multiple lifetimes. The tricky part is going to be, how do you create a narrative out of that? How do you look for the key thematic ideas? What are the things that hold this whole story together? That's still going to be the challenge. I think that's going to be one of the hardest parts of especially this early stretch of writing and researching, is really kind of parsing out that narrative, figuring out how to bring all these different strands together into not a singular story, but in a way, yes, kind of a singular story. It's going to be very difficult. And without going too much into detail about what I'm planning for the early part of the podcast, it's very much, there's going to be a lot of background information that we need to go through in a very short span of time. We essentially need to catch everyone up, whether you're someone who knows a lot about music or whether you're someone who knows almost nothing about music. I want this to appeal to both audiences. We're going to need to catch everybody up with a lot of musical terms and information and historical context from really the beginnings of humanity and the beginnings of humans processing sound all the way up until the year 1877 when Thomas Edison records Mary Had a Little Lamb on the phonograph for the first time. So there's a lot of history there and a lot of information there that really needs to be conveyed in a very small amount of time. A lot of history classes, a lot of music history classes will take multiple semesters, 2 to 3 semesters maybe, to cover the type of ground that I'm hoping to cover in maybe like half a dozen podcast episodes. And in my case, the time that I have to commit to that is necessary if I want to make sure that people are bought into the idea in the first place. I can't make a podcast about the history of recorded music and then not get to actual recorded music until like episode 25. That's just probably not going to fly. So figuring out that is going to be a massive challenge. And that's where a lot of my brain power, a lot of my energy is going to be focused. And as a result, I think that hopefully we'll still have videos coming out at a semi-consistent clip, but it's not going to be the same. Hopefully it'll be a consistent clip where it's not just like huge batches of videos coming out in short spans of time and then a break for like a month, which is kind of what this channel has done in the past. Hopefully it's something that's more regular, but also still spread out. Maybe you'll get a longer video every week or every other week or that sort of thing. And then book reviews kind of as circumstances allow. But that's kind of the channel update as far as like how I'm kind of envisioning things. And hopefully, again, that focus on more music related content will confuse people less about the purpose of this channel, because I definitely think that confusion is a large part of why we're not even better spot than we are now. So not only will it kind of attract people in that sense, but I think it will also hopefully, again, just kind of connect people to the whole like idea of wanting to understand more about music and not just about the artists that we all know and love, right? I've been very pleased with the response to like the Tony Bennett video, for instance. And it's kind of incredible to me that people were willing to sit through almost 2 hours of rambling about Tony Bennett, of all people. Not that people don't disrespect him, but he's not necessarily someone who is compelling enough in the eyes of most people to warrant a 2 hour long video. So hopefully, focusing on this a little bit more will kind of bring more eyes to the channel, bring more eyes to this project, and then at some point in the future, I would love to say before the end of the year. I can't make any promises, but if we can get this launched before the end of the year and really just carry a lot of momentum into the future, then I'm really hoping that this will be something special. I'm really excited about it. And I think, especially in this day and age, especially with the state of the world, which continues to turn into more of a dumpster fire and more of just a complete like laughing stock each day. I mean, it's unreal the amount of daily pieces of news that just seem like they're out of an Onion article. In this era, in this time when it feels like the truth is more distant from us than it ever has been in maybe the history of the world, I think it's really important that we have things and projects that are dedicated to ascertaining the truth and the true history of things and really bringing that to the forefront. And standing up against the ideologies and the ideals of people who want to suppress the truth or want to whitewash the truth as if it never happened. I think certainly the pushes to remove teachings of, whether it's related to slavery or the civil rights movement and things like that, removing that type of idea from schools and the educational system. That's the type of thing that has a very direct impact on what this story is about, right? There's a very direct impact. I mean, you cannot tell the history of popular music or recorded music without talking about slavery, without talking about the dynamics between enslaved people and white people, white slave owners. The entire act of minstrel performance has an enormous impact on the entire history of recorded music and popular music, and we need to talk about that. And we're in the stage now where we need to be the ones talking about it. We the people who care enough to do this research and educate ourselves, we need to be the folks talking about it, because we can't trust those in power to educate those who need to be educated. It's on us. It's on people like us. And so that's why something like this, I think, is going to be really important, because I want to make sure that those types of stories are centered in the discussion consistently. And maybe in our day and age, it doesn't seem that radical or that important to say that, well, music was directly impacted by slavery, but 20 years from now, who the hell knows what things are going to look like in 20 years? And if this project, if this podcast does exist in 20 years, if it is allowed to exist in 20 years, then my hope is it will have helped educate at least one person, at least a few people, in the truth of what really happened. and understanding the stories of those who have been suppressed historically. Apologies, there's a plane or a helicopter flying over the apartment. I don't know if that's picking up. So yeah, that's my soapbox for the afternoon. But it's really important, I think, that something like this is told. And frankly, I didn't trust that anyone else was going to do it. So that's why this project has mattered to me as much as it has. That's why I've spent almost 5 years of my life building up to this moment, kind of right here. Yeah, it's just it's important that it gets done. I don't, I don't want to overstate any sense of self-importance or anything like that. Because of that, I just think it's important that it exists in the first place, and someone needs to fucking do it. So, here we are. Questions. That's really cool that people are into the older discography rankings. Like I said, I'm really, you know, I honestly am kind of surprised. I mean, these are people who, like, there are no discography rankings for them at all, anywhere, really. I mean, I'm not sure that there's anything beyond a Rate Your Music list somewhere that has a proper, like, Tony Bennett discography ranking. Maybe there's one article somewhere that's like top 10 Tony Bennett albums or something like that, and it's clearly someone who got into Tony via, like, Lady Gaga or whatever. And there's nothing wrong with that in the slightest. Nothing wrong with that, but it's going to be the perspective of someone who's done a very shallow dive into their discography, and there's just so much gold, so much to be excited about and genuinely enthused about. In Tony's catalog, certainly. In Nat King Cole's, and holy cow, don't get me started on Ella Fitzgerald. Oh my god. I mean, so many phenomenal albums in her discography. I was stunned, honestly. She's a phenomenal talent, but there have been folks as talented as Ella who I didn't think had nearly the same, like, strength of catalog, same strength of album discography or what have you. So for Ella to come out with, like, not kidding, like 25 albums at least that I think are legitimately great, is just floored me on a fantastic stuff. Yeah, like, I understand why people, just to Steph's point, I understand why people start in and around 1965. I mean, 1965 is obviously a very, like, important year in the history of popular music, and really a paradigm shifting year because of Dylan and because of what the Beatles were doing. Massively important year. But yeah, I find that it is missing the forest for the trees a little bit if you're only focusing on stuff that came out that year and after. There's so much gold from before 1965. There's so much gold. And yeah, I mean, even if you have ranking videos that go before 1965, they often get cut off at about, like, 1955, 1956. And yeah, if you're doing an album ranking, you can't realistically go that much earlier and, talk about it in the same sense. Because, again, so many albums in, like, the 40s especially were just kind of singles compilations. But there's a lot of gems there. And I think a huge part of it, too, is just people who are, like, scared of jazz music. I mean, we can call a spade a spade. It's people who are, and I don't mean this to be judgmental, but I think it's exactly what it is. It's people who are convinced that jazz is too intellectual for them, convinced that they are not going to understand jazz and that they don't get it, that sort of thing. And that, I think, makes people anxious. I mean, I think it was a barrier for me when I first started. It's an entirely instrumental style for the most part, and it's very based off of very technical playing. How am I going to appreciate this? And I think people just need to, like, just throw themselves in and try it, and I think they'll be surprised there was someone at work who was talking about that not too long ago, where she said that she started going to like jazz clubs a little bit because her friend was in a jazz band, and she had zero interest in jazz music, but she actually found out that she liked it quite a bit, and is starting to actually like get invested into it. Like, learning about like the composers and stuff like that, and that's really awesome. That's really cool. So like, it's possible, and I don't think it takes that much work to actually learn about those styles. And jazz is only one part of pre 1965 music, of course, but that's just to throw out one example. Yeah. Grant's question. Yeah, a couple of really good questions there, Grant. So here a huge part of this too that I need to figure out how to tackle is cultural balance. Western classical music is going to be a topic that gets covered and gets covered quite a bit, but it's not going to be the only thing that gets covered in those kind of eras. Because while really the concept of recording music is a very Western concept, I mean, you can actually, like, if you dig into like the cultural values of like the West as a monolith versus, India and China and like a lot of the Eastern nations, the West is the one that has this like real focus to the point of it almost being like a hyper fixation on preserving music in some way and playing it back kind of at will. There's a lot of focus on improvisation in Eastern music cultures that the West just doesn't have. That's why jazz music is as unique as it is. It's because it's really the first major prominent Western musical style to be based upon improvisation. So because of that, like, there's a lot more material to talk about with Western classical music compared to like the classical music of, Vedic India. Eventually when India splits into like the Hindustani and Carnatic musics, in the mid second millennium, if my memory is correct. It's been a while since I've looked at the exact dates. Or classical Chinese music. I mean, there's a sense of like improvisation there, but not necessarily as much of a focus of writing things down. So the Western classical tradition is unique in that there's a fuck ton of sheet music out there. People wrote stuff down because that was part of the deal. We were focused on standardizing things so that we could play things back exactly as it was performed the first time. So because of that, like, there's going to be a focus, an outsized focus on Western classical music and Western music in general as part of this. And that's going to go through the whole podcast, unfortunately. There's not really a whole lot that someone who was brought up in Western culture and who is writing about ultimately a very Western-centric idea, the act of recording music and preserving it in a very literal and exact sense. There's not much I can do to change that. But I'm going to at least try to push back and try to give people a narrative of like what was happening in Chinese classical music, in Hindustani and Carnatic music, in Persian music, in Japanese music, in all these different eras. So, yes, there's going to be kind of an episode for each era, I suppose, but it's not necessarily going to be built around the classical terminology. Like, at the moment, I'm thinking there'll be an episode about like prehistoric and ancient music. Then there'll probably be an episode on medieval music, and then like maybe into the early like Renaissance period. And then after that, I'm not entirely sure how it's going to be divided up, because you get into a lot more topics once you get into like the Renaissance era, because the Renaissance era, you start talking about the music business, which is a huge part of this conversation. Like, when I say the music business, I don't mean the record industry, of course. I mean like music publishing and copyright law and how music works in those spheres. That's a very relevant topic to today, and we need to understand how it came into existence. So you have to talk about that. You have to talk about the the developments in like the accessibility of music. So like the invention of the piano, the rise of the middle class in the, especially in the 19th centuries, where all of a sudden the piano goes from this kind of ostracized instrument to becoming one of the central instruments in the entire West, where every like middle class and upper class household had a piano in there. And as a result, sheet music and popular music in many forms became accessible to the average person in a way that they just weren't before. So you have to talk about that. Of course, you have to talk about, the impact that the Atlantic slave trade and that slavery in general had on music. So that means you have to delve into the roots of like, certain African styles, at least to a degree, and then talk about how that manifested itself in like the music of enslaved people. Music of indigenous Americans has to be thrown in there somewhere, of course. And trying to think what else. Oh yeah, and then the whole technological bit. I mean, the technology that we use to record music is based off of technology that Persian scientists were fucking around with 600-700 years before. The same type of ideal of like etching something onto foil of some sort and then playing it back. Now the Persians weren't able to successfully do it. Edison was the first person in many ways who was actually able to successfully do it, even if a couple of other people were experimenting with the idea around the same time. And I know there's like that one French scientist who, Edouard Léon de Martinville, I think is his name. I'm going completely off of memory there. But, he was messing around with that stuff 25 years before Edison. And even though we weren't able to replay it in his lifetime, we've been able to replay it since. So that the technological bit is really important. And then you're also talking about the history of theater, too. The history of theater is a huge piece of it because so much of early popular music and early recorded music is based off of American theatrical traditions like vaudeville and minstrelsy, of course. So, very long answer to a couple of short questions. Yes, it's going to be broken up in terms of era, but there's a lot of complexities here that I need to figure out how I want to structure and organize and navigate. Who is my favorite classical composer? That's a good question. I feel like I could give a few answers for that. Beethoven is certainly up there. I mean, Beethoven is a cliche. Like, everybody says Beethoven, and everybody, and usually like people can back that up by saying that like they know at least one Beethoven piece because he's everywhere. Most people at least can hum you the Moonlight Sonata. But really, I think Beethoven is one of those people, kind of like the Beatles for me, really, in the pop or rock music sphere, where the more you learn about them and the more you listen to their stuff, the more compelling they become. I've read something like 4 biographies on Beethoven at this point, and that's one of my earliest videos I did was talking about them. And the more I learn about him and the more that I just like listen to his music, the more I just think it's outstanding what he was able to do, especially if you contextualize it with what his contemporaries were doing at around the same time. So he's certainly up there. Chopin and Schubert. Schubert is definitely up there for me as well. Chopin very near the top. Debussy, of course, I think is up there. One that I've never like put him in my top tier, but I feel like the more I listen to his stuff, the more I am going to get there is probably Stravinsky. Like, I feel like if I go back and look at the list of pieces that I've heard, I feel like I actually haven't heard as much Stravinsky as one might expect, given how important he is to Russian classical music and the history of classical music in general. But yeah, Stravinsky is just such a fascinating figure. so many different like distinct eras and things like that in his entire career. Someone who just kept innovating and kept inventing and kept pushing himself into interesting areas. So he's up there for sure. Also Bartok. Someone was on Blue Sky was talking about Bartok earlier today. He's definitely up there. His string quartets are essential listening. Essential. Bizet's a good one too, Grant, for sure. Not as intimately familiar with his catalog, but I mean, Carmen is definitely a brilliant piece. Really, a really, really great piece, I think. A really great opera. Yeah, diving classical composers is kind of hard if you want to be a completist about it. The easy way to do it, and what I've done in the past, is like diving a specific type of work that a composer is really known for. So, like, if you're diving Beethoven, for instance, diving his symphonies, doing a dive into his piano sonatas or his piano concertos, or his string quartets. But like exploring one aspect of his work, because I have a box set, which I will show at some point when I do a video on the box sets that I own of every single Beethoven work. It's a Naxos box set, and it's really cool. It's really great stuff. And it's about 100-ish CDs. It might actually be way more than that. I might be completely underselling that, but it's a lot. I mean, these guys wrote, and I say guys intentionally for the most part, unfortunately, but these people are so prolific. There's so many just random ass pieces. You know, like Beethoven, I mean, this is still a well-known piece, but like Wellington's Victory, for instance, the March piece that he wrote in, I think it was 1813, 14, something like that. Which is widely considered to be one of the worst pieces written by a prominent classical composer, and a lot of people say it's Beethoven's worst piece, at least for sure. You know, that's a random piece that doesn't fit in well with anything, but it's still part of his oeuvre. And there's plenty of other random little sketches and things that he wrote. Same is true with Mozart. Same is definitely true with Bach, who wrote, it felt like, everything in like every type of style that was popular in the early 18th century. So, yeah, I think just sticking to one type of piece. So, like, if you're interested in Beethoven, start out with like the symphonies. Those are fairly straightforward. Like, because for one thing, from a length standpoint, they're the most comparable to like an album. His symphonies are generally going to be like anywhere between 30 minutes to a little over an hour long. And then there's also like, it's a small amount. There's only 9 of them, compared to like piano sonatas where Beethoven wrote, I don't remember how many, 20 something, 30 something. I should know this. I took 3 fucking semesters of music history in college, but yeah. I'm curious, Steph, like what type of lectures have you been like watching? Because there's a good chance that I would be very interested in whatever you've been kind of checking out. Something for the podcast and couldn't be fun. That's a really good idea, Grant. That's a really good idea. I guess could jump off of that too. There will be a Patreon. At this moment, I kind of don't want to launch the Patreon or launch a Patreon in general until after the podcast goes live. I really want to. I would feel weird about trying to do it now, because I feel like 800 subscribers isn't necessarily enough to, justify to justify starting a Patreon. It might be. I might consider it if there were people who said they'd be interested, but I definitely feel like I might just want to wait until the podcast actually starts, because I feel like at that point I will have put my money where my mouth is a little bit. So rather than asking people, hey, pay me for this thing that will happen eventually, Now they'll actually have something, so they'll be able to kind of hear what it is they're paying for and decide whether or not it's worth it for them or not. But we'll see. And yeah, if we do that, Grant, you're definitely going to be a top candidate to guest, for sure. Oh, that's cool. Yeah. Um, I've only seen clips actually of the Young People's concerts. I don't think I've ever actually sat through and watched one in full. Um, but yeah, those are definitely. I mean, they're important pieces as far as like the history of music education goes, for sure. Oh man, a lot of chatter. I can't imagine how people do this sort of thing professionally, man. Like just standing here in front of a camera and talking for hours and hours on end into the void. It's definitely an interesting dynamic. But yeah, I mean, that is now you have a lot more context on my thoughts on classical music. There will be some sort of classical related videos that come out, I think, as I'm doing like research for those episodes of the podcast. I'll probably do like a top 10 Renaissance pieces or something like that, doing things like that. Because even if the podcast itself isn't going to be Western classical music centric at all, I still think that'll be interesting. Um, an interesting gateway for people, I think. And I mean, again, like I don't think there's a ton of people doing that sort of content out there, so I think that's a pretty untapped market and something that I think people would be interested in, especially like those people who are like music students and are just looking for some sort of a gateway into all this stuff. Um, I think that helps for sure. I learned about classical music when I majored in music at community college, but they only covered a small part of it, so I've been wanting to find out more about. Yeah. I'm very curious about your like what types of courses you had to take, like what was part of your curriculum. Um like cuz I know from my experience um I mean I did it at like a university or whatever. I was very fortunate, but their focus was so entirely heavy on Western classical music. It was 3 semesters worth of courses, and you know, part of it, there were like optional rock history courses you could take as like electives, but they didn't actually really count towards your degree in a meaningful way. I think like they counted for 1 credit towards your degree or something minuscule like that. But it was 3 semesters of classical music history and then like 4 semesters of music theory, a bunch of electives and stuff like that. Yeah, yeah, that makes sense. Yeah, we had like 4 semesters of theory and ear training. They were essentially just like combined classes. And then for my program at the University of Minnesota, we had 2 semesters piano classes that we took, which I really appreciated. I mean, I say this as I'm standing next to my piano right now. I do wish I had taken a little bit more, but hoping to kind of get back into like actually practicing piano hardcore and drums. I don't think I've talked about this on the channel, but there's a drum set just out of sight from me over here. In fact, hang on. There she is. Excuse my unsteady hand here. So that is what is it, an Alesis Strata Prime. I got it. It was a good financing deal at Guitar Center that I got it for, but I am so out of practice on the drums. So I actually signed up for a membership on Drumeo, if anyone has ever heard of that. So I'll be kind of like getting back into that. But I'm really trying to carve out intentional time for music making and stuff like that. in the not too distant future. My friend, one of my friends who is kind of in the midst of working on an album right now, asked if I wanted to drum and do some stuff on his record with like production and things like that. So I might actually get hands-on practice with some of this stuff again after being out of shape for a bit, which is good. And I really like that because I think having that perspective of making music, even if I'm not really like a songwriter myself, I think that perspective is so vital for understanding like music history in any sense. You know, not just do you know how to play an instrument, but do you understand what it is like to help someone create something and bring it to the world and present it to the world, and then watch their reaction as people, well, react to it, right? I think that understanding that piece and understanding that kind of emotional catharsis and also that emotional stress too is important if you want to evaluate and understand music just kind of in a general sense, whether that's as a historian or frankly whether that's as a music critic as well. I'm not someone who wants to thumb their nose at music critics who don't have experience making music, but I do judge internally a little bit. Yeah, I totally get that stuff. It's music, majoring in music is something that like I don't regret it in the slightest. It's provided me with a lot of the knowledge base that I currently have for what I'm doing. But it was a very interesting dynamic, and I don't necessarily say that. I don't necessarily say that in like a positive sense. It's definitely very like button up. I think in a lot of places, very regimented. And if you're like exactly right, like if you're, someone who's a bit more of a free spirit and is more into the types of music that allow that to blossom, it's going to be kind of difficult to flourish in the music school space because they just, many of them do not give you the space to do so. So that's difficult. And yeah, Grant too. I think the other piece is, even if you're not someone who's helping with like just the creation of music, just the act of playing with someone else. It's one thing for me to sit in my little apartment in here and just fiddle around with the piano and drum around and try to make music on my own. That's valuable, I think. It's important to get that hands-on experience. It's important to understand that, but I think it's also so critical to be able to play music with others in any setting. I did band, it's like concert band for a number of years. I did what do you call it? I did orchestra for a couple of years in like high school, and then again I did it a little bit in college. So I mean, this is, that dynamic in and of itself I think is important because you're learning how to play with a very large ensemble, just as learning how to play with a rock band or any type of band is important because now you're learning how to play with a small ensemble. So yeah, I think that piece, like making music creatively with someone else, whether that's improvising and jamming on something or whether that's even if that is playing a classical piece and, just, playing written sheet music note for note, that's still a very different dynamic. And that's, you're still getting benefit out of all of it is what I'm trying to say. Yeah, for sure. I mean, Tori Amos, I think, is a great example of that. And just as a teaser, I suppose that Tori is going to be the next discography dive on the channel. Her story is so interesting. Just again, truly a prodigious talent, like, classically trained in the very literal sense. But just was not cut out for the life of being, just intentionally, I suppose, was not cut out for the life of being a classical prodigy, I suppose, right? You know, the type of like wunderkinds that you see who are like touring around the world playing piano recitals of, you know, Rachmaninoff pieces or whatever, um, up until they get to like their early to mid 20s and people stop caring because they're no longer considered a prodigy anymore. So, yeah, very interesting. I'm excited for the Tory ranking too. I think, you know, I there's a couple other Tory rankings out there on YouTube. The one, what's it called? Old Drunken Discography, I think is the name of the channel. It's like a rotating cast of characters. I think it's like two guys on there who do it regularly, and then they had a woman on there who's like a huge Tori Amos fan, like very active in like her Facebook groups and stuff like that. And it's a really good video because overall it's extremely positive on her catalog, and that's the approach that I'm going to be taking. Spoiler alert, because I like all of her albums and love most of them. So I'm very excited to be positive, and I'm excited to hopefully take a little bit more of a balanced approach to her later catalog, because a lot of people tap out after Scarlet's Walk from '02, and I think there's a lot there's a lot more great material after that people are missing, if that's the approach that they take. Regina Spektor will get a video one day. I don't know if she's top of the list necessarily, which is not at all to say that I dislike her or even think she's that mediocre. I think she has a lot of great albums. Admittedly, I think, and I try not to do this too much, I think maybe there's a little bit of hesitancy there just because I am some of her, shall we say, political opinions, I think, have made me hesitant to talk that much about her. She's a very avid Zionist, I believe, if my memory is correct, and I believe it is. But not that is going to stop me necessarily from talking about other people. I will talk about her one day. She's just not necessarily top of mind. Yeah, I mean it's all about like opportunity, I think, right? You know, I mean, like there are plenty of people who don't even get the opportunity as much to play in sort of like ensemble settings. So, you know, in that case, right? Like, I mean, it's about making the most of what you have. But I do think, yeah, for those who are in a situation where they're able to collaborate actively, even if it is on a very like part-time basis, like I haven't played that much music with other people. I've had like one jam session in the last probably like 3 years, and that's about the only other time I've really played music with someone recently. So I mean, it's hard. I think probably especially hard in the post-COVID world, frankly. But yeah, man, it's so worthwhile if you can swing it though. It's so good. Playing with two metalheads, which is not my vibe at all. Interesting sessions. Fair. That's very fair. One of the interesting parts about this whole project, I think, is confronting some of my own musical biases and musical not preconceptions, I guess. I have never been a metalhead, just transparently. Not to say that I dislike metal music at all, but it's not something that I really ever turn to for pleasure. And the metal bands that I do listen to for pleasure are usually fairly odd. It's either going to be like Sabbath, Metallica, or like, I don't know, Tool and System of a Down. All very like popular names, don't get me wrong, but not necessarily like, it's not like I'm listening to specifically like new wave of British heavy metal stuff, or like only like really really early metal, or only like progressive metal. I kind of like cherry pick from all these kind of different areas arbitrarily. So that's an area where like I'm gonna have to get a lot more familiar and a lot more educated with that genre, just very transparently. And even if I don't dislike that one as much, certainly I think the sort of glam metal stuff of the late '80s and early '90s. I think that's definitely an area where transparently I will need to educate myself on and gain a lot more appreciation for over time. Not a genre that I've had great experiences with personally, and I'm okay if that doesn't change, but I think it is important in order to tell the history properly and with appropriate weighting of everything that I at least understand more where the sense of appreciation comes from. What are some other genres that you're nervous to get to? Um, it's hard. I don't know that there's genres I'm nervous to get to really. I think it's mostly like there are genres that I'm nervous to talk about, definitely, in the sense that I think they're just very easy to fuck up if you don't understand them. And yeah, metal is potentially one of them, but I think for the most part, it is going to be like the non-Western genres, the genres that require cultural context to truly understand. Um, I made to kind of segue it back from the beginning, in case anyone didn't see the beginning, I recently made a post about how last night I actually wrote up a bunch of words for a potential future podcast episode. Not getting too much into it, but basically that I was writing stuff up for a potential idea for an intro, like a kind of an intro episode. And the whole scene setting is about the idea, like the thing that sets the stage for everything is about the idea that music is the universal language. Which is an idea that I believe and that a lot of other people in the circles that I'm a part of believe that notion is utter bullshit. I think it's nonsense. And the crux of that is that how can anything be a universal language if it requires so much cultural context to truly understand? Have a good one, Steph. Music requires a ton of cultural context. Like, I can listen to, or pick the average person on the street. The average person on the street listens to, like, Javanese gamelan music, right? They might listen to it and think it sounds really cool, but they're not going to know what the fuck is going on. They're not going to be able to name the instrument, most likely. There's probably not words going on, so they can't, like, connect to anything, or if there are words, they're not going to be in a language they can understand. So maybe they think, oh, it sounds really cool. Maybe they appreciate it in a sense, but they don't understand it. And if you want to call something a language, that implies some level of understanding. So that's kind of the nerve-wracking part, is that if I try to write about gamelan music or about Chinese classical music or about raga or, insert non-traditionally Western style here, the nerve-wracking part is saying, like, well, how can I, someone who was born and raised in the Midwestern United States, how can I possibly understand enough to be able to talk about this in any sort of educated way? And the answer is, in the grand scheme of things, I'm probably not, but I at least think it's important to make an attempt to discuss it in context with everything else and give it its share of the spotlight when appropriate, because it doesn't do the history any good to just ignore it. So that's kind of the part. I think a lot of these genres I'm going to enjoy listening to as I kind of dive into them more. Certainly, like, Hindustani classical music, for instance, I've enjoyed a great deal. I've listened to a lot of Ravi Shankar albums, and I've really liked pretty much everything that I've heard. But I don't have the tools necessary to talk about it eloquently. And that's the part that's nerve-wracking, I think. So, yeah, that'll be the part that is going to require the most kind of education, active education, and the part that I think, if I had to pick one section of this podcast that I think is the one that will have the most, like, holes in it potentially, it will probably be that. And I'll ultimately I can do is just do my best to make sure that it's as good as it possibly can be, and that it is ultimately fair and accurate and representative to the genres and the cultures in question. I probably won't go on for too much longer, but I do want to shout out, which I think I did in the intro video, the channel update video I did a couple months ago. I do want to specifically shout out a couple of the podcasts that have certainly influenced me, that I recommend, if people have not checked them out already, to actively listen to them. Those being Tyler Mahan Coe's Cocaine and Rhinestones, a history of 20th century country music, and then History of Rock Music in 500 Songs by Andrew Hickey. Two pretty popular podcasts. Chances are, if you know of any music podcasts out there, those are going to be two of the most likely ones that you've heard of, certainly is in the music history realm. But certainly I think we have to kind of acknowledge their influence in how this project is going to be presented, I suppose. To be clear, I'd heard of these podcasts years and years ago. I didn't actually listen to them properly until within the last year and a half. So this idea for the Music Deep Dive project predates my listening to Cocaine and Rhinestones and History of Rock Music by several years. So just to be clear about that. But their podcast did tell me that an audio format is the right one to go with. It's going to be the most compelling. It's going to be the most all-encompassing, I suppose, as far as telling the story in a compelling format and using audio clips to supplement that. If anyone has not listened to either of those podcasts, I would say do so. They both also have transcripts readily available. At least Cocaine and Rhinestones does for its first season. Season 2, because they published a book version of that, the transcripts aren't on the website anymore. Although that might be only a temporary thing. But if you haven't listened to those, check them out. Cocaine and Rhinestones, I think, is just a masterpiece on many levels, both a historical level and just from a storytelling standpoint. I think Coe takes a lot of liberties as far as how he constructs a narrative and how he manages to interweave different things in his stories. Especially in season 2. Again, I think season 2 is as good of a piece of music nonfiction as has been created in the last 10 to 20 years. I think it's just stellar. And then A History of Rock Music is just a really... It's a podcast that has evolved a lot in the 6+ years, I think, that it's existed. And it's one that I think takes a subject that you would think has been beaten to death, and in many ways has been, and just injects so much life and information and context into it in just a brilliant way. I've been re-listening to that podcast because there's a lot more episodes of that one, so I'm less familiar with the content than I am Cocaine and Rhinestones. But the way that Andrew Hickey, who is an author, I've been aware of him since 2012 or something like that. I've known of him for a long time. But the way that he's able to explain things, the way he's able to contextualize things, and isn't afraid to tell the truth about who people really were, I think is really great. So the way that they construct narratives and the way that they tell musical stories in an oral format are fundamentally super important and super influential to what this Music Deep Dive project will turn into. Certainly, I think this project is different from what they're doing in quite a variety of ways. It's not specific to a certain genre or to a specific era. It's more all-encompassing. There's still going to be areas where the topics overlap for sure. And those are things that we'll navigate as they come. But certainly, I think the goal here is to make sure that this is something that is substantially different from their works in a lot of topical ways. And yeah, hopefully it ends up being something that stands on its own, but I think also something that hopefully kind of sticks to that tradition of compelling podcasts that are about music history related subjects. So yeah, just to shout them out. If people have good music podcast recommendations too, feel free to throw them around. I have been listening. I've been trying to sample a lot more just to kind of get a sense of like how people structure podcasts in different ways. I've been listening to a bit of like Mike Duncan's History of Rome, for instance. That's not music related, of course, but that's one of the definitive nonfiction podcasts that has ever been made. And so I think it's important to understand kind of how he constructs a narrative, how he tells a story. And so if people have like recommendations, ideas of different like podcasts in kind of a similar vein, not necessarily just kind of like podcasts where it's two people and one person tells a history and the other person just kind of is there to crack jokes. Like that's not ultimately what the Music Deep Dive podcast or whatever it's going to be called is going to be, right? But if people have just recommendations, whether it's something that they think is something that could parallel this project in a way that I might be interested in checking out to get ideas from potentially, or just, something that might be compelling in general, I'm all ears. But of course, I know probably quite a few people who watch these videos actively don't listen to podcasts that much because, I mean, we need to make that time to listen to music, right? That's what we're here for. Okay. I feel like we're at a point now where we can probably wind down a little bit. I don't want to keep this going for too long, especially because I need to actually get cooking dinner. But really just wanted to... Christy makes a podcast as good as he gets the artists themselves to break down their thought process on songs. That's a good recommendation. I know there's a few like kind of song breakdown ones. I think like Song Exploder is another one, if I'm not mistaken. That I haven't actually spent a lot of time with. So I definitely want to make sure that I listen to those a little bit. If for nothing else than just it's good context to have, right? But yeah, so keep the suggestions coming, and if there are any. But I think we're at the point now where I might call it. Again, I want to make sure that I have time to cook dinner and do all the things that I need to do. But I think ultimately, hopefully this was at least a little bit informative on kind of what the next part of the channel evolution, the channel progress is going to look like. And yeah, hopefully it's been kind of fun for people just to like hang out and chat for a little bit. Not sure if how frequently we'll do these in the future. I'd like to do them occasionally, but as you can see, we're still trying to get familiar with OBS and how it works. And I'm pretty sure I screwed up a couple of settings in here as well, which is always fun. So take care, everybody. Really hope you enjoy the content that we have been putting out, the content that we will continue to put out. And if you're watching this, if you're new to the channel, if you're watching a replay of this, please make sure to like, comment, and subscribe. As always, more reviews, more videos, and that sort of thing are to come. Make sure to hit that bell for notifications. Tell a friend as well. Word of mouth is really huge for helping these kind of like creative projects and things like that. So it really means the world if you could tell someone who that's interested in music, hey, go ahead and check that guy's channel out. He knows what he's talking about, at least some of the time. Thanks a lot, and I'll see you next time right here at your home of the Music Deep Dive. Have a good night. All right. Bye now.